So hi everyone, and delighted to introduce Marc Laurenson, who is talking to me now all the way from Australia. Hi, Mark.
Hello, Frank.
Hi there.
Nice to be here.
It's great to have you, and thank you for doing this. We're really excited about having you here in September. But before we talk about that in a few moments, tell us how you got started. I know you were an actor. How did you go from being an actor to being a full-time astrologer? How does that happen?
Well, the funny thing was, I was an astrologer before an actor, really. I got my first astrology book when I was 10 years old. I was a book kid. And while all the other kids are out playing ball, sport out there on the field, I was in the bookshops. I was hunting through bookshops and I always found myself being drawn to the esoteric area as a 10-year-old in primary school, in elementary school. And there was a couple of books on astrology that I always found fascinating. And I browsed through them. And as I was reading them as a 10-year-old or just scanning through them as a 10-year-old, I was thinking, I know this stuff. This is really familiar stuff to me. It feels like something I or have already known somewhere along the line. And as a 10-year-old, I couldn't quite put my finger on what that meant. And there was in this particular shop, it was quite a groovy shop back in the very late 60s, early 70s. And they had all the signs all over the walls, posters of them. They had the posters of the crab and the scorpion and the goat and the twins. And I remember looking at the posters thinking, I know you guys. I mean, they were like old friends to me. I felt like I wasn't even looking at something that was new and just the energy, just the feeling of what these signs represented as a 10-year-old to me. It just felt like they were kind of almost like immersed in who I was.
Wow.
And so that was me as a child. And all the way through my teens, I got into knowing everybody's birthdays. And so I knew everybody's signs. I knew their signs before their names. And so I was doing kind of mini sun sign readings as a teenager. I'd be telling people all about who they were as far as their sun signs were concerned. Um, Around this time, I started getting involved in acting too. I left school quite early and was wondering what I was going to do. And then I was really lucky to get into a TV series quite early. And I went into drama school. And then I kind of sidetracked over into acting for quite a long period of time because he was paying me. And I went where the money was. But even when I was acting in between shows and even while I was doing shows, I was always talking to people about astrology. So I want to say that, acting was a big, big part of my early life, but astrology was there. Astrology has always been there. And in my 20s, as I was getting further into my 20s, that New Age movement was really starting to happen. We had the Course in Miracles was big. It's just been written a few years before. We had Louise Hay starting with her books. Marianne Williamson was lecturing on A Course in Miracles, Wayne Dyer, all these wonderful, wonderful New Age speakers. And I became a big, big part of all that. I loved it. And I was so heavily involved in the spiritual side of life. And I was trying to reconcile my spiritual understanding or what I was learning. I was doing a lot of meditation at that time. I was having out of body experiences myself around that time. And I was thinking, how can I reconcile? How can I bring my spiritual understanding into astrology? Because there wasn't much around back then, on the astrology level, with understanding astrology on that level. And then it would have been probably in the mid to late 80s, I came across Stephen Forrest's first book. He wrote The Inner Sky. A lot of people might know this book. It was pretty new in its time, where Stephen, the wonderful evolutionary astrologer that he is, he was the first person that I knew of that was blending these two together, an understanding of our spiritual purpose, time here on the earth plane as a way of learning and evolving and growing and developing, and using the astrology chart to do that and understanding the astrology chart on that level. And then when that happened, when I sort of glued these two together, it was kind of like, whoa, that's when everything took off for me. I was heading towards my Saturn return at that particular time. And that's when I started to take astrology really, really seriously, like really seriously, and threw myself into it, hook, line, and sinker, and learned to do charts, learned to read charts, and slowly but surely, made my way into the astrology world. It took me a little bit of time because I never really thought that I could make a living out of doing this. I thought that I was just going to be one of those astrologers that did it for friends and friends of friends, and people would get to know me that way. I never ever thought that something like what I'm doing now could happen. And it was around my late 30s when I had Pluto square Pluto. I was going into all the midlife transits that we have in the late 30s and early 40s, that I realized that this was my life and there was no way I was going to do anything else. And by hook or by crook, I'm going to make it happen. And I started my business. I started studying astrology school, and it exploded. The rest is history. I mean, it's amazing how the universe will support exactly what you need to do when you're in alignment with your purpose, with your true purpose. The universe is there for you. So I look on that as a great example of lining up with what you're here to do and how the universe can help you with that.
Thank you.
So that's basically, in a nutshell,
Story, yes.
that's
So,
all.
um, I'm curious, of course, I'm sure people will be. Do you remember the books that you first read, those books as a 10-year-old?
Yeah, it was the very first one I got was Linda Goodman's Sun Signs.
That would do
Do
it.
you Linda Goodman's Sun Signs was the very, very first one. That was the one that I kind of was my Bible, as a 10-year-old. And she at that time, as I said, at that time, Frank, there wasn't that many out there. They all started to come out much, much later. I started to get more involved in reading a little bit later on, but that was the first book that I took under my wing, and became, as I said, became the the first my first understanding, my first way of being able to understand astrology was with that book as a child, as a kid.
And it was perfect timing because it must have just been written around that time and made its way to Australia as well. I
I
know it was
think this would have been around 69, 70 when I got it. I think it was written in 68, if I remember rightly.
yeah,
So it would have been pretty new on the shelves when I got my hand on it.
wonderful timing, yes. So, and Linda Goodman later would write Star Signs, very much about reincarnation, immortality, a whole range of
Yes,
things as well that
yes,
would have piqued your interest back then as well,
that's right.
in the 80s, I think. So, so Stephen was opened the door to evolutionary astrology for you, and of course Stephen's very big on the nodes. So is that where you got into the nodes, or did that happen in a different way?
Well, it would have probably happened at the same time. The nodes of the moon always fascinated me. When I was first understanding astrology and when I was first getting it all together, I found them fascinating. There was something about the the karmic energy, and I knew in Vedic astrology how Ketu, Rahu, and Ketu were all about karma, and about what we bring in from another time, and how we're working through it this lifetime. So there was always something about the nodal energy that fascinated me on that level because, as I said, in the 80s, I was very, very much into an understanding of things that were going on beyond what was happening on Earth. And so it would have been around the time I got the Inner Sky, and I actually sent Stephen a snail mail letter. Um, back before, long before all this kind of stuff, long before email, um, pretty much saying I was a fan and I wanted a reading from him. And he was kind enough to write me back snail mail, and I got a reading from him, and he did my nodes in the reading. Um, and that really took me to another level of the nodes, because I got somebody like him um, giving me a really professional understanding of what they were about. Up until then, it was kind of a little bit like fascinating and really drew me in, but they were still very elusive to me. They were still kind of hard to grasp. They were still, in my 20s, I found it still was finding it very, very difficult to understand what they actually meant this lifetime. And then when Stephen did my reading and brought them in, and I just went, oh my gosh, this is not only not only did I understand the nodes, but his interpretation was just, it just triggered so much in me, because a lot of the stuff he talked about was stuff that I remember, stuff that I have dreamt about, I have fears about to a certain degree. So yeah, so from then I just grabbed them and just ran for it, and all my readings from then on had the nodes as a major feature in them. Yeah.
Stephen's just written an article for me for the next TMA, the Mountain Astrologer, and he's got a. We put a sidebar in of his approach to evolutionary astrology, and what he said was surprised me because I hadn't heard him say this before. But it was the fact that uh, he says that uh, the chart looking at the node, looking at Pluto from a karmic perspective, doesn't necessarily represent your past lives. It could be dipping into a well of the family or the inheritance in some way, and it could be
Yes.
way back.
Yes.
So I didn't. I'd always got the impression that the nodes were about the last previous lifetime from people. So I'm curious. Is that something you obviously agree with?
Very much so.
Nodding. Yeah.
Very much so. The nodes are so fascinating because they're not a one size fits all. They really aren't. So you can't actually say this is the nodes, this is how they play out, because they don't. They don't. There's something about an emotion memory of sorts that comes in with us. Um, and it can come in through a past life. If you want it to be a past life, or you feel it's a past life, then it's a past life. But I have so many people in my readings that have said, this is my mother's story you're talking about. Or my grandfather experienced this when he was a child. So much of it also gets passed down through the lineage. It gets passed down through the generations. And if you go back in time, you're going to look at that as a past life anyway. I mean, the whole understanding of things being passed down through the generations like a relay baton almost. And you've got the relay baton now. And it's kind of like, okay, it's up to you. You've got to bring this home, or at least do something with it. So again, rather than actually saying this is it, this is the way it has to be a past life, it has to be through family. It opens itself up so broadly. That's what I love about it too. I'm not a fan of people saying this is the way things are. I don't really like locking things into one way, because astrology, as you know, Frank, there's so many there's so many nuances, there's so many subtleties, there's so many layers and dynamics and dimensions in astrology, that trying to fit everything into, one basket, or it's or a square peg into a round hole, a lot of it doesn't actually fit that way. And so I've learned so much about the nodes, I've learned so much about charts, but definitely about the nodes through my clients. So the idea of them being good or bad is another thing. Was it it was bad in the past life for you? Well, for some people it was. For some people, I know people who've brought in a lot of stuff from the past, from their south node and the planets involved, that come into this lifetime in a way that they really have to deal with things that they probably had some pain around. Other people might have done them well. They might have been really good at something. They might have excelled in something. And so they might have actually gone, oh, I know I was really good at this. I can tick that off my list. But at the same time, it has come into this lifetime. It has come into this lifetime, not as something you can just push aside and say, I've done that. It comes into this lifetime to be still worked out in a way, because even if you were good at it, even if you did it really well, there might have been an emphasis on, the emphasis was very, very heavy in that area, because the nodes are an axis. They're a balancing act between the two of them. And so if you've come in with the past life, even if you've done it well, or the generational dynamics, even if you've done it well, it's kind of heavy the scale on one side. You know what I mean? The scale of the South Node is heavy. And it's about you being able to find a way to do the North Node this lifetime to even the balance. So even if you did it well, you just might have put too much in that area. You might, if it's a Capricorn, you might have been overly responsible. You might have been overly ambitious. You might have been good at it all, but you might have just put too much cream on that cake. You know, you might need a little bit of heart. You might need a little bit of love. You might need a little bit of, care with that Cancer North Node to the, bring the axis into some kind of balance and equilibrium. And so when you see it like that, the South Node doesn't necessarily have to be good or bad. It depends on the person involved, because as I said, I've seen a lot of people who bring in the South Node with a bit of pain around it, for sure, for sure. There was no two ways around that. But at the same time, we've got to always be, again, not going down the road of the node has to be this way. The node has to be painful, or the node has to be good. It's going to be unique. It's going to be individual. It's going to have something. It's going to have something that's so what that person needs, and how it has played out and how it fits in, is unique to their life. Yeah.
Well, wonderful. Thank you. That's it's great to know. I think anything you do in astrology, if you have a simple formula, you miss the shades of interpretation, and you miss the opportunity for people to really have different experiences that you learn from as well. And as you know, you learn more being a teacher than simply just studying astrology, because you learn a
Exactly.
consultant and a teacher. Now,
Exactly.
you're flying over to see us in
I
London.
am
We're recording it as
very
well. It's
excited
going to be
about it.
live in London, and then we'll make sure people have a recording of it later. But it won't be live streamed. We're in a new venue. We're at the Rudolf Steiner House in London on the 2nd of September. So really delighted that you're coming. You're looking at the nodes in synastry and in transit as well. Is there
That's right.
any anything you want to say about that? Or, I mean, I know you already said quite a bit about the nodes just now, but
Well, yeah,
snippets to sell it.
yeah. I mean, I'm super excited about coming over, to be honest. This will be my first time doing something like this in London, so this is really, really exciting for me. It's going to be the day is going to be like a three-tiered kind of day. So I'll open up with the nodes and an understanding of the nodes and how I work with them, and I'll bring up some examples of how they play out in charts just by themselves, and then I'll move on to an understanding of how you might feel, or what you might be experiencing when the nodes get hit by a transiting planet, particularly a transiting outer planet, and a solar arc planet. A solar arc planet coming into conjunction with the nodes, or even squaring the nodes, can be quite a big time for a lot of people. And then I'll move on to when another person's planets are coming into aspect with your nodes. So if you're in a relationship with somebody else and their Venus falls on your south node, or their Pluto is squaring your nodal axis, that's going to be something that you two have either done before. You can talk about it on the level of you've been together before, or you've had some kind of uh, not necessarily a relationship before. It could have been that. but it's more on the level of your essence or your vibration or your energies in touch with each other outside of this realm, and you've come back into this realm together, um, to be each other's teachers, basically, to be able to help each other, to be able to take each other through what you need to learn this particular lifetime. You know, with the backdrop or the backstory of possibly what went on between you both before. So it's really interesting. I love looking at the nodal dynamics in synastry. And to be honest with you, I've done a lot of relationship readings in my time. And I don't know if I can actually count any strong relationships that have not had nodal dynamics. Just about every relationship reading I've done have had planets in contact with each other's nodes. They've been through stuff before, and you could actually have it with your family's nodes. You know, that's also another big one. And even friends. You know, it doesn't necessarily always have to be your lover. It can just be people that you're strongly connected to this lifetime. Yeah.
I agree. And I used to sort of put nodes to one side. And when you do synastry, they're such magnets for people that I could no longer ignore the nodes. They were always there in terms of what the key issue was in the relationship, or as you say,
Yeah.
what people are being invited to work out, should they take up the challenge as well, of course. But yes, it's sort of a compulsive energy, isn't it? It's that magnetic thing that it feels almost like,
Yeah.
why do I keep getting attracted to somebody with the moon here or Mars in this
Mm,
position, and the nodes just seem to hunt it down or attract them. So it's going to be a
exactly.
fascinating day. I really appreciate you coming over, and we're going to make sure you're looked after very well, I hope, and the jet lag is all over before then, and we'll make sure you have a great day. So, but thank you for being here to tell us about that. I really appreciate that, and
Thank you, Frank.
we'll see you in September.
I
Thanks.
can't wait. Can't
Thank
wait.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you.